Well, see, but I hate to say it, but that's the reason why I agree with Martin Scorsese is that as good as the films are, Marvel is not true cinema.
Wow.
What's up, everybody? My name is Michael Stephenson. Welcome to my YouTube channel. You are currently watching my art/entertainment industry series in which I talk about mainly film, television, a little sprinkling of book publishing, as well as music in there. If this is your first time here on the channel, I would ask that you please go and watch some of my previous videos. I am trying to build a particular lingo or language here on the channel, a little shorthand between myself and you all so that you can understand exactly what I say when I say Avatar era or Lost Effect, and you don't have to I don't have to re-explain that. I could just have that shorthand so that hopefully my videos get shorter as we go on here. So it would be I usually save this for at the very end of the video. I have a little clip, a little add-on clip in which I talk about how I'm an author, I'm a writer, and I ask for you to go buy my books. But I feel like in this particular video, I needed to mention that early on because we are going to be talking about the plot structures of Marvel movies. So first off, this is still my Marvel month. I'm trying to fit in most, if not all, of my Marvel criticisms, as well as, the ups, the downs, all the good, the bad, all that stuff, reviews and what have you. I'm trying to fit all of that into like 1 or 2 months. So this video, it'll probably be jumping around to most of the movies. And I think that this is also a problem, or it's going to be a problem again going forward. And this is the reason why I was going to initially title this video, The Reason Why Marvel is Not Cinema to Me. Basically, what it is that the reason why Marvel is not cinema is because of the fact that throughout the franchise, most of the films pretty much have the same exact plot. Like beat for beat, they have the same exact plot. Their structures don't vary very much at all. And that is one of the problems, is that there's no real difference there. And because there's no real difference, there's very little room for true and inspired artistic expression. Okay, so let's first off go through it. We all know what the plot is in most of these movies. First off, we start with the villain. And the reason why we start with the villain is because we can't really start with the hero. The hero is usually a reactive, by the very nature of heroes. Heroes are usually reactive characters. They react to something that the villain has done. They're not proactive, going out specifically to seek out a way to be a hero. In most instances, they are reacting to something, usually something bad, that has happened to them. So looking at most of the films from phases 1, 2, and 3, and even a few in 4, what we tend to have is almost all of the films that we had were in some way, shape, or form revenge flicks from a villain perspective. Okay, this is, as an aside, this is another reason why I said in my Dune 2 will probably suck video, I said in that video that Dune 2 will probably suck, but it'll be slightly better than Dune 1 based on this one specific thing, and that is that it is going to actually have a plot, unlike Dune Part 1, which didn't have a plot. And the reason why it's going to have a plot is because it is going to be your average run-of-the-mill revenge flick story, to where Paul Atreides was going to be pursuing revenge above and beyond almost anything else. And I haven't seen the movie yet, but I'm just going to assume that I'm right, that it was a revenge flick. And we've been conditioned by Marvel, as well as by John Wick, and frankly, a lot of other action films and whatnot. We've been conditioned to see a revenge flick as being, as not only as just being entertaining, but it's a very easy and simplistic plot or narrative storyline to get into. Okay, somebody was done wrong, somebody else is standing in their way, or somebody else did them wrong. The person who was done wrong has to get the person who did them wrong, etc. So when you look at most of the movies from the first few phases, what you have is that you have the enemies, the villains, generally were done wrong by somebody related to the hero. In some cases, like for instance in Iron Man 3, it was the hero himself who did the ultimate villain wrong. In other cases, like in Thor Ragnarok, it was a family member, oftentimes a parent, usually a father figure, but it could also be a mother figure, but it was usually a father figure who did them wrong in some way. And this sort of repeated over and over and over again, that in some way, shape, and form, the villain was not only done wrong by someone either related to the hero or the hero themselves, but that because of that connection, the villain in and of itself was the villain in and of him or herself was usually also connected to the hero. It sort of goes back to the idea that heroes make their own villains. With that said, a lot of the films started to feel repetitive and redundant. And again, this is, as I've said earlier, the reason as to why these things did not feel like true cinema. They were instead sort of carbon copy cutouts of each other, to where you could take out this character and just insert X character. Take out Y, insert R. Take out T, insert V. There was never really true creativity from that sort of standpoint. I think of, gosh, I'm really trying to think of something that was different, and it's very difficult to think of something that was different. In my no, because even that's similar. One of the few movies that actually stuck out within that era, within the pre-Endgame era, and really just across all of the MCU, was the first, well, yeah, I guess it was Infinity War, because of the fact that it wasn't necessarily a revenge flick. It was one of the few that wasn't actually a revenge flick. Thanos was not seeking revenge so much as he had his own legitimate pilgrimage to go on, his own legitimate, by God, heaven sent reason and motivation behind what he was ultimately trying to do. But he still had the relationship between him and at least one of the heroes, and his relationship, his up and down, twisted relationship between him and Gamora. So it was, it's hard to say that they fully broke away from that. Now, don't get me wrong, and I discussed this in my Through Lines video. I mentioned it most likely in my original Through Lines video. You can go look that up on the channel. And I think I also mentioned it in my Marvel Through Lines video. And what I said there is that a lot of times throughout the entirety of the Infinity Saga, from Iron Man up to when he dies in Endgame, a lot of the other characters are avatars for Tony and some level or some form of his own personality. So you can understand why the constant replaying of the parental relationship in a complex relationship with either parents or with some familial or past historical connection replays over and over and over again, because Tony seeing himself in other characters, or seeing Tony in other characters, is kind of the thing that is a through line, an overarching theme throughout most of the Infinity Saga. So all of that stuff is played out. So when you have something like Chris Pratt's Star-Lord in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 meeting his father Ego, again, that's a parallel to Tony Stark's own complicated relationship with his father, Howard Stark. So I get it why they potentially repeated these narratives so often, why they repeated these same plot lines over and over and over again. But the problem again is that because they were repeated so often, the films started to, in many ways, feel as if the, not only were they predictable, which fine, there's always a certain level of predictability within these kinds of films, within action films, within comic book films in general, but they also, in many ways, started to become almost a blur in and of themselves. So because they started to sort of blur between the different plots and things of that nature, you needed a particular level of a high level of style to go into the films to make them feel different, make them feel, weirdly enough, in this case, you needed style to make them feel more substantive, which is almost never really a thing, but it became a thing here for the MCU. So one of the things that was incredibly egregious to me was the nomination of Black Panther and the overpraise, in my opinion, of Black Panther. This is also around the time where I stopped watching the Oscars. Looking back on it now, I think that it was partially also due to the whole Black Panther getting an Oscar nomination and things of that nature. Mainly because, if you guys remember, Black Panther came out in the same year of Infinity War. And Infinity War was an incredibly different film when you consider all of the previous films that had come along. As I said, it didn't really have that revenge aspect to it that almost all of the other films had. Their villain was not about revenge pretty much at all. And while it maintained some of the other things from the Infinity Saga broadly, it turned everything on its head by focusing mainly on Thanos. So if you go back and you rewatch that movie, what you will find, if you're looking for narrative structure, for plot structure, for thematic structure, for the different resonances, emotional resonance, all that stuff, what you will find is that Thanos was actually the protagonist of that movie. And because he's the protagonist of the movie, it's his movie. Basically, it's his movie to make or break. And so, yes, you may not be rooting for him because you still know in the back of your mind that he's technically supposed to be the villain. He's supposed to be the bad guy. Thematically, he is played as the protagonist or even somewhat of an anti-hero as he is on this sacred journey. And that, to me, was an incredibly magnificent turn on the entire structure of the comic book movie, especially the superhero comic book movie. It was different. It was just so vastly different. And that was great. That was a great thing. So when Black Panther got nominated, I was like, Infinity War should have been the one that got nominated. And if I'm being honest, Infinity War should have been the one that won the Oscar for the MCU. Endgame was okay, but I felt like Endgame, weirdly enough, had pacing issues. Yes, it was a nice frolic back through time, back through the MCU as a whole, trying to hit some of their best points, their best moments. But Infinity War was just that movie. It just was. It was just that movie. Endgame was great in closing everything out. Infinity War, though, I felt like that was the better plotted movie, the better narrative film. So going back to Black Panther, one of the other reasons as to why I didn't particularly think that it was worthy of the nomination that it got, unfortunately, is because of the fact that Black Panther was the same exact movie as almost every other MCU film before it. Case in point, the biggest, most notable similarity was in Thor Ragnarok. It almost, in some ways, and I'll be talking about this in my Black Panther video when I talk about both Black Panther 1 and 2 and all the things surrounding those movies. But in some ways, it might have ruined my potential enjoyment of Black Panther because I saw Thor Ragnarok not but 3-4 months earlier. Thor Ragnarok came out in November, I believe, of 2017, and then Black Panther came out in 2018, February of 2018, and then of course you had Infinity War come out in May of that year, I do believe. going through it, what did you have in Black Panther? You had pretty much the same thing that you had in almost all the other movies. In Thor Ragnarok, you had a long lost family member come back and seek revenge because they feel as if they had been in some ways slighted by the father of the main character. So in Thor, it was Hela coming back, who is apparently the older sister of Thor and of course Loki. You know, like the relationship between Loki and the rest of them. But she's the older sister, and she comes back because their father, Odin, was it Odin or is it Odenheim? Their father, played by Anthony Hopkins, he has died, and she's now returned to essentially reveal to Thor and to Loki that, and to Asgard, to the Asgardians as a whole, that yeah, this whole idea that you guys have of Asgard is completely different than what the real Asgard was like, and that in reality, Odin was this powerful, sort of menacing, kind of evil warlord, and he loved going around and just slaughtering in various realms, right? As this super comic booky type of king, so to speak. And that's kind of the same exact thing that Killmonger does and says, and that's his story in Black Panther. Like there really is no difference there almost at all. Killmonger comes back. He tells the main character in T'Challa / Black Panther, he says, "Yeah, hey, look, listen, your dad, he was doing me wrong. He either did me wrong and or he did my father wrong, and so now it's the big payback. I'm here basically to get revenge because T'Chaka is dead, so I can't really get revenge directly on him. So you're the next best thing. I'm going to take it out on you." It was the exact same plot. And the problem to me was that, again, a lot of my fellow Black people acted as if this was somehow new and groundbreaking. And I'm just like, no, it wasn't. Not only was the narrative pretty much the exact same between the two movies, between Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther. And as I said, it wasn't even new or inventive in Thor Ragnarok, because you can look easily to Iron Man 2 or to Iron Man 3 or to almost any of the other movies throughout the entire Infinity Saga. They had the same exact plots and plot points. It wasn't that. It was that even the themes were pretty much the exact same as well. Killmonger kind of came to Wakanda to cause chaos and to kind of destroy Wakanda from within, from inside. I know, and I understand that he was trying to, or at least he said that he was trying to rule over Wakanda and be some sort of, I don't know, new leader that they really needed, etc., etc. But let's be honest with you, he was going to destroy all of the traditions and things that they had already built up over the course of years. How is that any different from the fire demon at the end of Thor Ragnarok? I fail to see a difference, not only narratively, but again, thematically as well. This notion that the villain had in some ways or some shape or form been done wrong by either the hero or someone who was hero adjacent had become so prevalent and so predictable that it did start to bring up the question of, why does this universe need heroes to begin with? Because they are the ones who are creating their own enemies. So, and let's get over this notion that the movies have to be predictable. They don't have to be predictable. Now, yes, you can say that, well, if they're adapting certain things, then the comic book fans themselves are always going to know, etc., etc. So, but they don't have to be so predictable to where you can call it beat for beat. Like, okay, this is going to happen next, then this is going to happen next, then this is going to happen next. They struggled very much so with not only trying to create villains that were not in some way, shape, or form related to the heroes, but also to just create narratives that were different and just in general, and that didn't have to rely on old tropes. It almost became soap operatic in some ways, very soap opera. So then how is that affecting their films now? Well, if I'm being honest, a lot of the films that we've seen so far, one of the reasons why they, I think, are kind of weak is because of the fact that Marvel is, we've as consumers, we've essentially grown far too accustomed to the standard revenge flick, a villain revenge flick that we've had. And so at this point, Marvel is, it seems very much like they're trying to explore other narrative structures, and they're not doing very well at it, right? So Thor Love and Thunder, for instance, you can only sort of kind of say that Gore is, that his whole thing is revenge, but it's more so revenge on all gods rather than just a Thor, rather than just Thor or a Thor related god. So it's finally, it broke away from that idea that the villain needed to have a specific, almost 6 degrees of separation kind of connection to Thor, or to the hero, right? Spider-Man, they also kind of tried something to where it was like, oh, it's going to be different this time because the villains that he's going to have and going to fight are not technically his universe's villains. They're another universe's villains. And it's just like, yeah, I get it, but it's only like, it's only sort of kind of, you only sort of kind of can get out of that trap, it seems, right? Only sort of kind of get out of that trap. But they still know Peter Parker, and they all know who Peter Parker is, et cetera, et cetera. So you can give them a mulligan on it, but it's basically the same thing as the old standby plot that the MCU has always had. Then you go with Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and they don't really, I mean, they do have a villain, but not really. Like, yes, Scarlet Witch is supposed to be the villain, but you never, it just always seems like you're not really fighting her per se. It feels, I don't know, it just feels different. It something feels off about it, and it's not necessarily like she's going for revenge either. But her and Doctor Strange, they do have a little bit of a relationship, or a little bit of a relation at least, in that they fought in the Endgame war. But before that, remember, they hadn't met. from what I can remember, they hadn't met until Endgame. So, and there's not like there's a scene of them meeting in Endgame, but there's still sort of a relationship there. But at least he didn't inspire her to do that. Again, it just feels like Marvel is sort of grasping. They're trying some things out. They're still married to the old standby of, let's just have the villains related in some way, shape, and form to the heroes. Case in point, Shang-Chi. But they're at least trying other things. But the problem with that is that they don't have one set specific structure that has worked for them yet. They just don't. And I don't know, it feels many ways like they're kind of running out of time to find one that will work and can potentially be placed on other hero villain pairings. Again, it's not necessarily that they need to have that structure. And if they didn't have a structure in place, if they didn't have that sort of factory line kind of assembly for their narratives, for their plots, that could lead to more artistic ingenuity and more artistic originality in their storytelling. but it could also lead to some real disasters. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we're seeing in these last couple of phases, 4 and 5, why we've seen some films that have just been, some of them have been okay. Again, Shang-Chi, I liked. I actually thought Black Widow was okay. But again, both of them kind of go on the old structure of hero villain, kind of related, have a past with each other in some way, shape, or form. But there's just, I feel like Marvel and the MCU in general is one of those brands to where, yes, they can definitely allow for artistic exploration, but they need to have a structure that they can fall back on just in case, so that they can at least get some product out there. And I think that that's where they are right now. They're trying to find a structure, and they just can't find one. I just don't know. Yeah, I just don't know where they can look to find one either, because most of the comic books kind of have the same structure too. So I think that they are really between a rock and a hard place on that. But once they do find a new structure to where they don't have to rely on the hero and the villain being related, and they don't have to rely on the same sort of themes always playing out, to where, you know, there's betrayal by an older generation usually in some way, shape, or form, and it's not a revenge thing. Once they find that structure, I think that they should be good for the next at least couple of phases, to be honest with you. But can they find it in time? I think that's the question. And at this point, I'm rooting for them, but I'm really not sure. I'm really not sure. So, yeah, you know, what do you guys think? I'm sure you've noticed that the plots get used over and over again, and, you know, the characters just are changed and altered slightly from one movie to the next to try to make things fit in. But are you okay with that? Are you okay with them going back to that same old structure? And are you okay with just, like, for instance, are you okay with the new Fantastic Four film when it comes out? You okay with them knowing Doctor Doom and having been betrayed by him, or them betraying him, or something to that to that effect? Would you be okay with that for Thunderbolts, for all of the movies that are going to be coming out in MCU? Or do you want to see some sort of narrative variety in some ways? I want to see variety, and I want to see a little bit more artistry here, but they're ultimately going to do what they want to do. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here. I don't have a Hey, everybody. So while I don't have an official sign off yet, I guess I should do the whole please like, comment, share, and if you so desire and you want to see more, subscribe. But more importantly, I will ask that you please go and purchase one of my books. They are mostly ebooks, and pretty much they are all under $10. See if any of my work is actually any good, if it lives up to any of the things that I'm talking about here on my channel, specifically with the entertainment industry videos. So please go purchase my books. All of my links are down below. Thank you.